Hi everyone. We're live and it's middle of the week. We have the wonderful person with us who's going to tell us about DevSecOps or DevOps with security. There are so many myths around it. So how we can actually separate those myths from reality is going to show us. So we have our very good friend Imran with us. So Imran, we would like to hear from you.
Hey,
Over
hi
to
everyone.
you.
I hope all of you are staying safe and staying at home and taking care of your families and yourself. I think with that, let me start the presentation and then we'll dive more into what is DevSecOps and what are the myths involved when it comes to DevSecOps. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Mm-hmm. So there seems to be a bit of lag in there.
Could be.
Mm-hmm. Let me cross check.
Yeah.
Okay, can you
Yes.
see it now? Fair enough.
Yes.
Let's go ahead with this. So the way this presentation is structured is we'll go through what is DevSecOps first, and then we'll talk a little bit about what are different myths when it comes to DevSecOps, and then we'll see how we can scale an application security program or a product security program in an organization using DevSecOps. And once we are done with that, we'll also see how we can mature your DevSecOps program in a step-by-step manner rather than just trying to do everything at one go. Okay. So as Vandana introduced me, I'm Imran, and also known as SecFigo. If you Google SecFigo, you would find me, and I'm only one SecFigo in there. So yeah. So I'm a founder of a company called Practical DevSecOps, which is a subsidiary of His Technologies Inc. We help our customers and students with DevSecOps consulting, training, and certification. And so the lot of my time is spent on implementing DevSecOps for different kind of organizations, training them, and then finally, if they are interested in helping them with their maturity program as well. And apart from that, I have trained on DevSecOps in bunch of conferences, including Black Hat, AppSec EU, PyCon, All Day DevSecOps, DevSecOn Singapore, and bunch of other conferences. So I know a little bit about DevSecOps. So I hope you will enjoy the presentation and learn a couple of things from this presentation. So now, before we venture into DevSecOps, I would like all of you to open up your browsers and then try to search for a term called DevOps tools or just DevSecOps tools, right? And then go into your image tab of Google, images tab of Google. You will quickly realize that then you will be bombarded with lots and lots of tools. And then when we talk about DevSecOps or DevOps, people usually think, oh, DevSecOps is all about tool, right? That's one of the myths. We'll talk a little bit about more about it. But for now, let's start with this one, right? So when we say DevSecOps, most people assume it to be automation. Now, that being said, if you notice what's going on in the industry from a practice perspective, we will know that uh, only 8% of the respondents for this particular survey, ESG survey, they are now trying to see how they can secure their DevOps pipelines or DevSecOps pipelines, right? And within 2 years, within next 2 years, 68% of the respondents expected to be securing 75% or more of their application using DevSecOps. Now, traditionally, DevSecOps or DevOps was not so mainstream, but with the advent of DevOps, agile, even security has kind of became mainstream. And you say it day in and out, lot of breaches are happening. And then with the recent GDPR compliance and initiatives, we see that more and more organizations are taking security very seriously, right? Irrespective of COVID or not COVID, they will definitely have a lot of ramifications in terms of maintaining data security, privacy of their customers, right? So we see that the trend is going to go up. It's not going to go down. As you can see, 68% of the people are interested to secure their pipelines going forward. So we'll see more of these going in future. There's no going back from DevSecOps or DevOps to no DevOps or DevSecOps. So it's only going to be moving forward from here on. Now, as I mentioned before, when we talk about DevSecOps, people just assume it's just a bunch of automations put into a DevOps or CI/CD pipelines, and that's about it. Hey, we are now DevSecOps shop. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and that's not the reality. People might assume that's the case, but that's not reality. Let me show you a quick glance of how these pipeline would be created in a practical pipeline. So here we have written a couple of tests as part of a pipeline here. You can call it as DevSecOps if you think DevSecOps is just about tooling. Then you can see here that we have static analysis as part of the build stage. And then we have a Git secret scanning, which is also part of static analysis. And as you can see, it's under build stage. And we have SCA for the front end, and then SCA for the back end. And then finally, we might have a bunch of other tests, including, for example, NICTO, SSL scans, Nmap, or ZAP baseline scans, container scanning, and bunch of other security related tasks like hardening of your production environment, or hardening of your container, or hardening of any system which goes online. And then finally, in order to make sure that the system stays secure and compliant, we can continuously scan for compliance. So historically, compliance is a one-time snapshot of compliance of our organization. Let's say if you're compliant now, and then after 6 months, you might not be compliant after 6 months or 3 months. So no one would guarantee. Maybe when auditor comes in, then say, hey, these people do have all the security best practices in place. And it might happen that after a while, someone does some misconfiguration and then they end up getting hacked, right? And all of us do know that being compliant doesn't mean you are secure, right? So but you can definitely automate the compliance aspect of security using different kind of tooling. However, even with all of this tooling, for example, let's see this. So as part of this pipeline, as you can see, I ran it like 5 minutes ago, and it ran for 9 minutes or something. So I have a bunch of tests here. As you can see, container scanning, integration scans, SSL scan, and all of those. Right? This is typical of what I showed you in this slide. Now, let's look at one such result of this compliance check. And if you go down, you will notice that we are not compliant to a couple of these. As you can see here, we did run 43 tests in here, and then 6 of them failed. And then among that, 5 controls were skipped. Now you see how it's very, very easy to put in tooling in DevSecOps and call it a day. Hey, we are a DevSecOps shop now because we have automated hardening, we have automated compliance checks, we have automated static analysis, dynamic analysis, and whatnot. So, and then we can all go home and be merry, right? But unfortunately, as I mentioned, that's not the reality. And if you notice, I'm stressing a lot on one specific topic, which is tooling. Automation is not DevSecOps, because that's what I hear most people talk about. I want to bring that awareness, at least in this part of the world, that hey, DevSecOps just is more than just the tooling in place. Now, in order to understand what's the importance of DevSecOps, you have to understand a little bit about history, right? As people say, history repeats itself. We will see how we can learn from our past mistakes as an industry, as a security industry, what we can learn from our past mistakes, and then make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes again. And then by doing so, we will be in a much better shape to influence organization in terms of doing security in a more mature manner. Now, the reason I say that is because at least when I started my career, I have been hearing this word, hey, security is everyone's responsibility. Now, think about from your own perspective, how often do you see that being implemented? Yes, we see it a lot. There's a lot of people talking about, hey, everyone, security is everyone's responsibility. But how often do you think everyone assumes that that's their responsibility and then does a right thing? People do want to do right thing, but unfortunately, the tooling, the culture, the processes, and the technology itself is not suitable to it's not suitable to mash it together in a nice way so that developers can just do the right thing in a natural way. Right now, if you have to, let's say, for example, enable SSL, you have to do a lot of stuff. Whereas if you use a modern tooling, like maybe let's encrypt our traffic, these these tools do security by default. They are secure by default. So we need to make organizations, our developers, we have to create tooling which is secure by default. And there's a lot of loopholes in there, but I think the industry in general is maturing, and we are seeing a lot of options which are secure by default. So let's talk a little bit about why that is important, how that will help us mature. So we have all seen this traditional SDLC model wherein we do requirements, design, implementation, deployment, and maintenance for maybe 6 months to close to 3 years to 3 to 4 years. Now, the problem with this is usually it's associated with a cost. Now, if you spend, as you spend more time in fixing bugs in production, then it will cost you more. So it's much cheaper and much efficient to fix an issue while designing it or while implementing it rather than doing that same thing in production. For example, in one organization, what happened was that there was a bug, and it's a logical bug. It's not a bug related to technology itself, like SQL injection or XSS, but the design of the application itself was not properly done. So because of that, no matter what kind of security controls you put in place, it was not solving the core problem. So they had to rewrite that entire application, which led them to spend close to $20 million on just rewriting that software again, because the design itself was flawed from the beginning. So that was the problem which the traditional SDLC had the problem basically, right? And I like to call this wall of uncertainty because I believe that there was a disconnect between what business wanted versus what development teams eventually give out to their customer, right? You might have seen this diagram wherein the customer wanted a bicycle, but they gave him like a trolley or a scooter, right? Something of that sort. So there was a disconnect between business and development. And to solve this problem, people started looking at different ways of solving this. They figured it out. Toyota, the Japanese company, is doing their production, the car production, car manufacturing in a very nice way. And they took methodologies and techniques from there and called it agile, right? Of course, there's a lot of other work went into it, but then that's the core idea of it, right? And to solve that disconnect between business and development, agile came into existence, right? And then now developers are trying to push code to production every 9 seconds, right? Some organizations like Facebook and Amazon, they push code to production every 9 seconds. And then some organizations expect their developers to push code to production on their day one, meaning you join a company today, you are expected to push code to production today. Now imagine if a person who doesn't know anything about stack or the technology or how the organization works, and you are asking them to push code to production, maybe there's a slight chance that they will have some vulnerability. They might introduce some vulnerabilities. Now, with the help of DevOps and DevSecOps, it becomes very easy that even if a person joins today, he will not be able to he will not be able to make our platform insecure and expose our customer, our company intellectual property. So we can ensure that. And to overcome this problem, and it's a genuine concept, it's not a made up term like how I did the wall of uncertainty. If you Google wall of confusion, it's a genuine problem, wherein here developers are creating software at a very rapid pace and then just throwing that end product towards the operations engineer over the wall, and they just say, hey, go deal with it, create, maintain, and then try to deploy this code and maintain it over a long period of time without any help. So there was a huge disconnect between, again, what developers, and a typical example of that is like, hey, developers might say it works on my system, and then operational like, okay, but it doesn't seems to be working on our production machines. So there must be some missing pieces in there. But because of this problem, there's a lot of confusion in terms of how do we deploy it, how do we maintain it, how do we make sure that the performance is guaranteed. And to overcome this problem, again, if you remember, agile came into existence because there's a disconnect between business and development teams, and then DevOps came into existence because there was a disconnect between what developers wanted versus what operations teams want, right? So DevOps, as you can see, is a set of practices intended to reduce the time between committing a change to a system and then that change being deployed into production machine, right? There's a lot of definitions around DevOps. Most people don't agree on one set of definition, but then I think this is a more what do you say, nuance, a definition of what DevOps is. And if you do that, now we might assume that, hey, when we do DevOps, we'll get a lot of benefits, but security has nothing to gain out of it. But that's not true. There's a lot of gains which the security team can gain if a company or organization does DevOps. For example, if let's say you have a vulnerability, and previously you had to wait like 6 months to patch that vulnerability. Now you can patch maybe in a 9 seconds or 15 minutes or a month or so. You don't have to wait a longer period of time to fix a vulnerability. That's an advantage we gain. That's what we have, like, you can. And another interesting, if you notice here, that there's no start and there's no end here. It's a continuous iterative cyclic form where it doesn't end. It's an iterative process. You do this process again and again and again or a long period of time. And of course, when you do something often, it's bound to become more efficient. It's bound to become more mature. So that's what the DevOps is trying to build into organizations' DNA, right? Now, you see, we started off from left-hand side, from requirements, design, development, and then we moving towards operations. And traditionally, software security was done at the end, like, hey, we are going live now, could you do pen test for us? And even how it goes, right? Like, even if you do find issues, maybe it needs a week worth of time to fix the vulnerability, and then usually they don't have that because they need to go live as they have promised our customers that, hey, we are going live today, right? Now, security has, as I call, love and hate relationship with the rest of the organization, especially with DevOps, because some people assume these guys are just a department of no. They just love to say no for every damn thing, right? But fortunately, with the help of DevOps, you can become their superstar or their hero, right? So they would love to get in touch with you because you are helping them become more secure without blocking them. I think I would stop here with the introduction of what DevSecOps or DevOps is, right? But another problem, another issue we have is that this is a diagram taken from Microsoft's secure SDLC program. As you can see, in each stage of SDLC, they ask you they suggest you to implement some other tasks in it. Now imagine there are about 16 tasks in it. Now if you say I have to implement all of these and each of them take a minute worth of time, then it would take 16 minutes of DevOps time to, or at least in the pipeline, to implement DevSecOps. But then the problem is it's a grave sin. We'll talk more about it in DevSecOps Gospel, but it's a grave sin to make a DevOps team wait for 16 minutes, right? Ideally, everything should be done within 10 minutes. Now you might be wondering, static analysis, dynamic analysis take forever. Some people also call static analysis tool as false positive as a service, right? So it's not going to happen. But then there are different ways to do static analysis, like incremental scans, doing a baseline scans, and making sure running them parallelly and making sure they finish within those 10 minutes, right? So that's one of the problem. Another problem we have is that we are now competing with 100 developers or 10 developers. The amount of code they push, we will no longer be able to do everything manually. So that's one another problem which DevOps is trying to solve. Now, this all looks rosy and beautiful, and everyone would want to do this. Now, when I go and ask our customers, hey, uh, you should do this, right? Now, shall we do this? And they'll say, oh, okay. So I think we don't have resources to do DevSecOps. What about it, right? So the first myth I would like to break is that, and then this is reality, that people think that DevOps is something, DevSecOps is a new term introduced just recently, and it's a new breed of another buzzword like cloud, big data, AI, ML, and whatnot. But that's not true, because when DevOps was forming, the creators of DevOps, or the people who conceptualized this concept or the methodology, they had a notion that security is part of operations, right? Because security is usually is pretty involved in operation aspect of it, be it either as part of pen testing, security engineering, SOC operations, compliance, and whatnot. But just like everything else, security is left behind because we are a department of no. Now, with the help of DevSecOps, people are trying to bring that awareness that, hey, DevOps, security is now learning DevOps. They understand the concept of DevOps and they no longer can ignore Agile or DevOps. So they're embracing this concept. So let's all work together. So that's the one first myth. Now, you might have noticed that the heading says DevSecOps, but the definition starts with DevOps. I personally believe there is no such term called DevSecOps, more like a marketing gimmick, to be very honest. But then it does serve a purpose, which is to bring awareness that, hey, you have to do security apart from doing DevOps stuff, right? People are now doing CI/CD, they are doing chaos engineering, a bunch of other nice, very interesting, innovative, cutting edge technology, cutting edge things, but they are not trying to think about security. So DevSecOps is a way, or an acronym right now people are using to bring that awareness that, hey, security also needs to be taken care of, right? And if you do that, what would happen from a security perspective? Obviously, these are benefits of DevOps itself, but it will give you a lot of flexibility. And more than that, if you are from operations side of thing, you are maintaining a SOC operations or doing a bunch of other stuff from an operational perspective, then the biggest benefit you as an individual have would be that you will be able to sleep peacefully. And I think that's the biggest impact you would ever have. You no longer have to wake up so often if a pager duty calls up. If you get a call in the middle of the night and then you have to wake up, right? That would reduce, because then your system in general become very, very resilient. It will be able to recover itself in spite of attacks, in spite of any kind of unforeseen situations. It will also give you flexibility, and then your system in general will become reliable. Example, so when Zane Lackey, who was a CISO at Etsy, it's one of a e-commerce, think it like a Flipkart for arts, right? They were doing DevSecOps, or they used to call DevOps security, but then a pen tester were just trying to find out a bug. Now, even before the pen tester reported the bug, they fixed it. Because they knew that their logging mechanisms, their alerting mechanisms were built on a continuous iterative and continuous improvement cycles, that they came to know, hey, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to separate a real alert versus a fake alert, right? And they were able to streamline it so much with the help of DevOps methodologies that they were able to caught the attack way before the guy even reported it, right? So that's the advantage. This is speed you will get when you implement DevSecOps. Now, as I mentioned before, the biggest myth these days we see is that people assume DevSecOps is all about tooling. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Some people might even assume that, hey, if I have to implement DevSecOps, I have to maybe spend like $10 million to buy fancy static analysis tools, dynamic analysis tools, RASP, IST, what all the fancy technology and tooling and all of that. And usually, when people think about the tooling, they think about paid vendors. But then you don't have to spend a lot of money to implement DevSecOps. Initially, you can just use open source tools, specifically from OWASP. OWASP has a lot of interesting tools. You have a Glue, you have Secure Code Box, you have a bunch of other interesting tooling. ASVS is another one, very interesting projects from Daniel and Andrew and a bunch of other people. You should definitely check that out. And then it doesn't have to be expensive. That's another myth we have. Even with open source tooling, you will be still be able to get a lot of leverage. Some tool or some paid tools, or commercial tools, they do offer some free trial, and then they also give you maybe say, hey, 10 scans are free or 20 scans are free. But that's just enough, good enough to get a buy-in from management saying that, hey, with the help of security in DevOps, we will be able to provide catch issues early on that will reduce the amount of time we spend on fixing, and that will eventually make our organization more secure, right? And another myth, as I would like to call it, is that security, as a security person, and I used to be that person as well, we think that it's all about security, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's all about business. If business lives, if business is making money, then it will help it run continuously, right? If a business doesn't exist, then maybe we will not have our jobs as well. So as a security engineer or as a security person, it's our responsibility to make sure the business runs with least amount of risk. Right? Security is part of one such risk, which is people might attack, use a vulnerability, and impose a threat to us. So it's all about business eventually. So we as DevOps engineer or DevSecOps engineers have to ensure that we are reducing risk of our organizations. So again, it doesn't have to be expensive. Another myth we have is that automation, DevSecOps is all about automation. If you do automation, you can call yourself DevSecOps and then go home and sleep nicely. But if to call yourself a DevOps or DevSecOps shop, you have to have four key ingredients. One is you need to build that culture of, hey, we as a security team are open for feedback and we would love to work with you. We no longer are a department of no, but we would love to work with you, share best practices, and reduce your workload probably so that you don't have to spend time to fix vulnerabilities too late in the CI/CD pipeline or SDLC processes, right? In general, you have to build that culture, and it takes a while to build that culture. It doesn't happen overnight. Tooling can be done in a day or two. So I'll give you an example here. I know a bank, a pretty big bank here in Asian region. They spent about $20 million buying tools, hiring bunch of people, integrating security tool as part of CI/CD pipeline or DevOps. But then after a while, they had to scrap that entire program because the automation did not help them move faster. Instead, it literally became a blocker because we'll talk a little bit about that, what was the problem as well in the next myth. So since there was no culture, they were struggling with spending that efforts, resources on bringing up that positive change. So automation, if you have a lot of automation, it doesn't really help if you don't have culture. Similarly, if you have a culture, you are doing automation, but you're not continuously trying to improve, measure. And as people say, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. Right? As simple as that. So you have to measure it. Hey, from an organization perspective, where do we lag? What are we missing in this puzzle? What we can do to ensure developers, we are giving developers tools, techniques, and processes to help them early on rather than just thinking about it at the end. So you have to give the information, right information at the right time and to the right people. So that's very, very important. These three things has to be taken care. If you are measuring some stuff, it shouldn't be logged into a, you know, some vault kind of a system where only few people have access to it. And we have to open it up more so that people have visibility without exposing sensitive information. And for example, you can say, you can create a dashboard, say, hey, this project is in red, blue, green, yellow. And then you say, whoever is in red needs to improve upon their security. You know, again, you're not disclosing anything sensitive here, like, hey, we have this bug at this particular line, right? And again, if you have missed the importance of Convex law, it states that if an organization designs a system which is pretty hierarchical in nature, the system it designs will also be pretty hierarchical. Meaning you have lots of layers, lots of approval needs to be taken before you do anything. Then the application you design will also be something like that, with very hierarchical, very clunky, very process oriented, you know, process or a tool. That's why you see the organizations like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they move so fast because the culture helps them move faster. So if you don't work on culture, it's going to be very, very difficult. And then you have to share these best practices with the rest of the team. And then another myth we have is that if we implement DevSecOps, all of the DevOps will come under security and we can be overlords and do whatever we want with it, right? That's another myth we have, but that's not the case. Similar to this, we have another myth where we think that, hey, security will lose control if we embed security as part of CI/CD pipeline, and then we will not have visibility. But that's definitely not the case. If you put security as part of DevOps, you will get more and more visibility, and you will have so many issues or so many data to take care, so much of data to take care that you will run out of disk spaces. Literally, yeah, I have seen this happening, right? So in short, we have to build bridges, not walls, right? And we have to build guardrails, not gates. What do I mean? It's another grave sin to fail a build, right? Because traditionally, as I mentioned, static analysis, dynamic analysis, they are riddled with false positives. Now, if you're failing a build based on a false data, then it's going to piss off a lot of people. So we have to make sure that we are not failing the builds unnecessary until we are sure that, hey, our pipelines, our code doesn't have any false positives. The tooling is customized so much that it doesn't spit up false positives anymore, right? That's another myth we have. So in order to ensure that we move on faster, we have to make sure that we are building guardrails, not gates, right? And then another myth we have is, if you want to implement DevSecOps, we don't need to be agile in nature, or we don't need to have DevOps in place, or CI/CD, or whatnot. Security can create their own pipeline and then put everything in there. And trust me, that's the worst thing you would do as a security engineer. You will make your life very, very difficult by doing it, because you would literally become a build engineer. All of your time would be spent on fixing someone else's code, and you would not be you would then need to learn different bunch of different build tools like Maven and you name it, Gradle, whatnot. It will be very, very difficult. So as much as possible, please, please, please do yourself a favor, put the security tooling as part of production CI/CD, CI/CD pipelines, not your own little island of DevSecOps. Sure, do consume whatever development team is using at the moment. Now, this is a typical diagram I show to bring that point to home, that, hey, in order to do DevSecOps, you need the organization to be agile, you need to do continuous security, you need to also do continuous delivery and deployment, right? Now, those are a couple of myths. I have a bunch of other ones, but then I think these are the most important, or we see more often, right? Then let's talk about, we now know these are myths. Let's talk about reality, right? What it takes to build a good, successful DevSecOps program. So first thing you have to realize is you have to start learning what is CI/CD pipeline is, a bit of coding here and there. But again, you don't have to be a DevOps ninja or an expert. You just have to know enough to understand what's going on. And then you can leverage the expertise which DevOps team has to build on top of to embed security. So you have to think about security from very go. And of course, this doesn't happen overnight. As I mentioned, it takes 3 to 5 years to bring that culture maturity in place. And then you have to make everything as self-service, right? Now you see, you switch on TV, you hate to see ads these days. That's why you buy Netflix, no ads, right? There are a bunch of services where their whole USP, the unique selling proposition, is, hey, we don't sell you, well, we don't show you ads. So people have become very, very conscious about their time. So they need to, we need to have self-service. So give developers and operations visibility into what security is doing, and empower them with the tooling at the right time, at the right place. All right. And then you have to make sure everything you do in security is as part of code. So everything has to live in a code. You can do hardening as code, you can do compliance as code, you can do a lot of amazing stuff. Even threat modeling can be done as code now, right? So try to leverage as much as possible to uh, use everything as code, infrastructure as code. Learn simple tools like Ansible or Inspect. Very easy to learn. Maybe you can learn it in a day or two. You don't have to be a programmer to learn these tools. They are simple, like Nmap or Metasploit for that matter. And then you have to make sure your whole job as a security engineer should be to create frameworks, should be to create tools and techniques, so developers don't have to spend a lot of time fixing issues or even introducing issues, right? That's where most of our time should be, rather than running tools click and pointy. So my boss used to say that if a monkey can run a tool, automate it, right? So static analysis, dynamic analysis, they can be automated now, but then your time is better spent on making sure you're reducing the risk as an organization. And finally, as much as possible, involve everyone in the organization. Create a security champions program if you don't have one, and then don't try to do everything at one go. Maybe start with your SCA, which is software component analysis, then move on to dynamic analysis, hardening, and other typical traditional secure SDLC activities, right? So again, as I mentioned, you can start off with open source tools and then move to paid tools if you need to, if you want to save some time and effort in there. So as you can see here, you can do dynamic analysis with Zap, a pretty good tool again from OWASP, or you can use Burp Suite to do that as well, right? And then you have threat fix here. You can also use another OWASP project called Defect Dojo to help do that, right? Now, these are some of the implementation details, but then if you go ahead and then try to implement these, it would be a very humongous Herculean task to do on an organization level. So in order to help organizations with this, we have a DevSecOps maturity model. As you can see, there are four axes in here, and each of them targets specific kind of tests, a specific kind of activity when it comes to automation, sharing. It doesn't talk a lot about culture, but rest of those measurement, sharing, and automation. So as you can see, and when I say dynamic depth, it doesn't mean dust. It also involves hardening, SSL scans, anything which you need an application to be in a running form, be it a dynamic analysis, SSL scanning, hardening, compliance checks, whatever those are. And then static depth talks about doing tests when the code is not in a running form. Maybe just as a text file or as a configuration file. So you can do static analysis of containers, you can do image scanning of images, a code configuration, and whatnot. Right? The Git's secret scanning also falls under static depth. Uh, what else? Configuration checks, security checks also fall under static depth. And then intensity talks about how often are you running these tools. Ideally, you should run these tests as soon as someone pushes a code or does a commit to a repository, whatever it is, how large or a small that project is, you can automate it to run it. And then again, once you run these so often on every commit, you will have a problem which is related to consolidation, also known as vulnerability management. The first time you run these tools and implement these techniques, you might have anywhere between a few thousand issues to a couple of lakh issues. And I'm not kidding. I'm not joking. Okay. The first time you run these scans, you will have huge set of issues. And then most of them are false positives, but then it takes a while to weed out and then figure out which ones are real versus which one are just not working. Right. So if you are interested, probably we will do one more presentation on that. But let's look at what are the few things you should not be doing as part of DevSecOps or DevOps pipeline, right? So the first thing, it talks about the culture. You have to build relationships with developers and QA, because ultimately they are the ones who are running DevOps pipeline, and you want your security tooling to be put in place in those pipelines. So help them, be their friend, take them for a coffee, just give them a nice t-shirt if you have to tell them, hey, we have some new program coming up, would you like to hear about it? So maintaining these relationships is very, very crucial for the success of DevSecOps. Either it be, let's say you're a CEO, then it's your job to make sure that there's a culture of trust between different organizations, and everyone is working with each other, but not as startup in their own in their own domains or silos. That's one thing. And then the second sin, uh, you should not be doing, this is a grave sin to do, is that you should not fail bills. The first time when you hear security people hear about DevSecOps, they're like, oh, now we can stop people from pushing vulnerable code to production. But that's not how it works, because as I mentioned before, security tools generate a lot of false positives. So you have to make sure that you got rid of all of them, or you have teach your tools that, hey, we are we have tuned these tools for our code, for our organization, so it will not have false positives. And trust me, if you are buying a tool and someone says, hey, buy our tool, you no longer have to write any custom rule sets, you don't have to tweak anything, he is selling you a snake oil, he or she is selling you a snake oil. Literally, you have to teach tools to work nicely in DevSecOps or DevOps pipeline. They are not yet ready for prime time. So you have to tweak, even if there are a couple of good tools in the market, but you still have to tweak them, otherwise it doesn't work, right? Okay, and then you should not run any tool which takes more than 10 minutes. And the first counter argument you might say now is that, hey, static analysis takes forever to run, maybe 2 hours. So I personally ran static analysis, which took a month to finish one scan. So I know the pain. But then you can run incremental scans, also known as differential scans. You will run the scans only on the files which have changed. Of course, it's not complete, but then you can run the complete scan as part of QA process rather than running in the production CI/CD pipeline. And then you should create separate jobs for each tool or scan: SCA, static analysis, dynamic analysis. As I showed you in the beginning, you can have hardening task, which is a separate job, then compliance check, which is a separate job. And then again, don't try to do everything at one go. As agile says, right, do something on an iterative continuous basis rather than just trying to do everything. If you try to do everything, you are now going back to waterfall model. That's not what we want to do. All right. And then yeah, if you are trying to buy a tool now for the DevSecOps, make sure those tools provide APIs. And one interesting metric you should keep for yourself is that whatever you do by point and click key, in the sense, whatever I can do from a GUI, you should be able to do that with the API or a CLI. If the organization or a vendor is not providing you that ability, ask them, force them, or influence them. Hey, we need this functionality, otherwise we will not buy these tools. Right? It's your job to figure that out. Like, hey, is it suitable? Can it finish within 10 minutes or so? And then uh, yeah, it should be does not here. Okay, any vendor who does per user licensing, please try to avoid them, because then when we are saying, hey, DevOps is all about breaking down silos, by giving access to security tool to only specific people, you are bringing that indirect influence, or indirect cue that, hey, only specialized people needs to do security, you are not eligible for it, we will not be exposing this information. Rather, you should be looking at the tools which give you per usage licensing model. Maybe, hey, you do 10,000 scans, we charge you this. If you do 100,000 scans, we will charge you this, kind of thing. Okay, per user licensing is a pretty bad model for DevOps related tools. And then especially for security, not maybe it can work in DevOps related stuff, but definitely not for security. And as I mentioned, incremental scan, baseline scans are a necessity if you want to put it in DevOps pipeline. And then you should definitely create static and dynamic custom rule sets. If you will not do it, then you will definitely have false positives. So you have to create. There are no tools in the market or in the world which can just learn by itself. AI ML is still not a reality, so you have to create these tools by yourself, tweak them, teach them, and all of that. And as we mentioned before, you have to do everything as code, and that too religiously. This will give you a ability of measurability, auditability, and then security. This will provide a lot of benefits. You can just latch on to whatever is there and then make your entire organization secure if you do that. We can also do false positives as code. I will not talk about more on that, but then if you're interested, come talk to me, right? And then link everything to a documentation, be it as a comment, be it as a wiki page and whatnot. Put it there so that people can fix their own problems, right? I think I'll start up here to take questions. um, but if you're specifically interested in learning more about DevSecOps, we have a practical DevSecOps community where we do monthly meetups, workshops, newsletters, and a bunch of other open source projects. So you might want to join those, right? Again, it's a free open community as well. So I think I will stop here and then take questions. Vandana, over to you. You guys can hear me?
Yes, Imran, we can hear you.
Great.
So, Imran, there are two questions for you in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pass it on to you,
Sure, sure,
or shall we
definitely.
take in the end?
I think I'm done.
You're done? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah,
Yeah, sure. One
mhm,
minute, let me just tell you.
sure.
Yeah. So, There's a question which is like a basic one. What
Mhm.
skills are required for an application security guy to move into DevSecOps?
I think AppSec engineers are in a very good place to move to DevSecOps pretty easily. All you have to know or understand is how Agile works, how DevOps works, and then understand a couple of bits and pieces here. Specifically, you should know a couple of at least 5 to 6 commands when it comes to Git, where they store the code, and then how that kickstarts a different CI/CD pipeline, what the CI/CD pipeline is all about, and then finally you have to understand a little bit about infrastructure as code, right? Of course, the cloud and other things you have to learn, but then these are the bare minimum. I call them DevSecOps critical tool chain. You have to learn those. The point is, again, you being an AppSec engineer or a pen tester is the same concept. If you want to attack a system, you have to first learn about that system, right? Similarly, if you want to do security as part of DevOps, so you have to learn a bit about DevOps. Again, you don't have to become an expert in DevOps, but just enough so you can do understand what's going on, where to put in security scanning, where to influence the culture, uh, how do I figure out what's the right place to put right security controls. I hope that answers your question.
So there's another question. Could you please throw some light on how threat modeling can be used in DevSecOps?
Okay, so let's go back to agile, right? So most DevOps organizations or DevSecOps organizations are agile in nature, which means they are continuously trying to implement features on a regular basis, maybe like on a weekly basis, bi-monthly or monthly basis. They are trying to push code to production on a very faster pace. Now, the traditional threat modeling, which was created for waterfall kind of a model, doesn't work here, because we are not deploying to production once in 6 months or in a year, but rather on a weekly basis or on a daily basis. So that doesn't work. However, there are a couple of techniques to handle this. Uh, some people call it rapid threat modeling. Some people call it agile threat modeling, and then white box hacking and whatnot. But the premise is, uh, you make sure that you do threat modeling as a product on a regular cadence, maybe let's say 3 months, 6 months, and whatnot, and then and keep it very generic. All you need to do threat modeling is a piece of paper and a pen. That's it. Don't make it too complicated with a lot of UML diagrams and whatnot. We just want to make it very simple, understand, and teach the development team, hey, how do you think like a hacker? And again, threat modeling. What is threat modeling? It is basically what we are trying to do, what could go wrong, and who could come, who would be interested, and as an attacker would be interested in this data, right? You just teach them that, and then and of course the security champions is also a very important aspect of it. Then you can uh, the security champion would be your eyes and ears from the each project perspective. So they will come to you if they have a problem, or they think there is a risk which they don't understand. Again, it all boils down to cultural aspect of the organization. From automation perspective, you can use a lot of open source OWASP model. Like for you have Thread Dragon, you have Thread Spec. Um, Scott is working on Thread Spec. So there are a couple of tools which will help you do this as part of agile threat modeling, or agile organizations, or DevOps organization. But again, as I mentioned, you do it often on a regular cadence based on severity of a project, importance of a project to your organization, or the sensitivity of the particular project. Again, same traditional threat modeling, but on a shorter cadence, like on a shorter span of time. Maybe you're doing it once a month and whatnot. And it doesn't scale, as I mentioned before, like it doesn't scale if many people are doing it very rapidly. So in order to do that, you have to leverage your security champions, your development team, and then scale it that way. We will never gonna have 100 developers for 100 engineers for 100 security AppSec engineers for 100 developers. It's never gonna happen. So you have to find out as I mentioned, automation culture are two important aspect of how you can scale that.
Uh, the question on the same lines, which
Mhm.
phase of the whole life cycle we should call
Mhm.
that we should be doing the threat modeling?
Obviously, again, see, when we say DevSecOps or threat modeling in DevSecOps, it's not so much different than our product security or traditional secure SDLC. So traditionally, we do it in design phase, right? So that's where it should ideally be. But then, because of the regular cadence of deployment, that might not always be possible. So you can leave that to develop DevOps team's discretion. One thing, or if it's critical to you, you can ensure that every time they make change to a couple of important files, you trigger manual threat modeling. You can say, hey, looks like you have changed these files. We would like to see why those changes were made, and then let's see if there is any risk to the organization. Maybe it's an authentication authorization kind of a thing, or a logging mechanism. So and it's very easy to do. It just takes a couple of lines of code to implement it in Git. So again, ideally in design phase, and with the if you have implemented OAuth ASVS within your processes, then these discussions will start even when we are gathering requirements. We are trying to create a feature, right? So some organizations, what they do is they embed one of the security person for a week in that particular project, so he gets an idea about it. So the security engineer is part of their daily stand-up meetings for a week. He sits with them for a sprint, and then gets to know, hey, what are the problems in there, and then the security engineer can rotate his presence to different scrum teams. So that's another, I think, technique you can leverage. But as I mentioned, to scale, maybe we'll not be able to do it entirely in design. But again, that should not stop us from saying, oh, they have already done design, so maybe it's not worth doing threat modeling. That's not the case. Even maybe they've gone to production, but still doing that threat model will influence them in a positive way, that hey, they will start thinking about this risk from next time onwards. Or maybe while doing it, you realize, oh, there's a problem. And in fact, while we were doing threat modeling for one of our project, what happened was the ops guy ran out of the meeting, and then he quickly did something and came back and I say, hey, why did you went out so suddenly and in a panic? And I say, I think we did something we should not have, so I just went ahead and fixed it, right? Because uh, no matter what security tries to say, everyone wants to do good. Even developers and operations teams want to do good to the company, organization, also as an individual. So if you give them right tools, again, techniques, they will definitely use it and make the entire organization secure by nature. Yeah, I think that hopes that answers your question. But if not, feel free to ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn.
Sure, I think there's a thank you for you, and
Uh-huh.
we don't see any more question in the chat box.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. So I think again, if you want to learn more about it, you can join the Practical DevSecOps community. We do workshops. The next one is coming on 22nd on OWASP Zap. Again, a pretty interesting tool. We release bi-monthly newsletter. We gather all of the articles, blogs, videos related to DevSecOps, and we share on a weekly, bi-weekly, no, bi-monthly basis. So feel free to join that. And then thank you. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you
And
so much, Imran. It was a really wonderful session.
thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity. Really appreciate it.